Cheers. This is about votes at 16, and that's part of the reason why I cracked a beer. You see, the people who are 16 aren't legally allowed to drink, and I'd like to say that that's a deep point I'm making, but it isn't particularly. Part of it is actually, I just did a video the other day, which didn't do particularly well, but I felt actually it was pretty good, just for my own personal kind of YouTube development. And in it, I was drinking a beer, and I quite liked it. I think it wasn't really so much the alcohol, the idea of an alcoholic drink, as so much as I just liked having the prop. So anyway, and also it's a time of the night to crack a beer, and it's hot, as you can see. I'm probably... Well, actually, it's a very strange thing. It's actually quite overcast, so it's not a sunny day by any means, or a sunny evening. But by the same token, it's very sweltering. Anyhow, cheers. Votes at 16. So I'm going to talk to you here about why I think it's a bad idea. Now, this isn't something I haven't spent any time on, or I'm coming at it from a very shallow point of view. I have worked for organizations, for instance, campaigning organizations. I won't name them. I don't actually want to do them the justice of naming them here. But, you know, if you wanted to look it up, you could see my CV online. You could look at me at LinkedIn. If you really wanted to know the campaigning organizations that I'm talking about, you could find it out, but I'm not going to mention them here, who have openly campaigned for votes 16. So, in other words, what I'm saying is I have worked for organizations that have campaigned for votes 16, also been involved in those campaigns, and understood the logic of them deeply. Now, I've written a piece for my Substack about why I think the left are so invested in votes 16. So I'm not going to rehash that here. If you want to read it, you can go ahead. What I really want to talk about here is I really want to get to the meat of why I think it's a bad idea. Because I think there's a lot of discussion going on. Because so much of it's tactical, right? So much of it, what we're getting is people who are Labour or Green or Lib Dem, or people who are just generally on the left, who think that it's tactically wise, right? There will be a tactical advantage to the left for people at 16 or 17-year-olds to have the vote in Britain. And that there is a perception on the right from Tories, just generally people on the right, doesn't matter where, could be reform people, who think that votes at 16 will be bad for the right and will ensure more left-wing government. So you get a lot of stuff that's very tactical, right? And I'm going to try and step away from that in this conversation. I'm going to really try and go back to first principles and tell you why I think it's a bad idea, just generally for democracy. So one of the things to say is, I will sort of almost start from that thing of the strategy and the strategic impulse. So I think the left are actually wrong about the idea that vote 16 will give them more seats, more votes, more chance of winning an election. Because I don't think it's actually true. I actually think in this day and age, if you look at what's happening, particularly in Britain, and it could be different elsewhere, but I doubt it's that different across the West, you're going to see a lot more young people who are interested in the populist right. That's what I think. So whether that actually comes so full circle that having votes at 16, 17 will be an advantage for the populist right, I'm not sure. I think it could be. I think if we're talking 4 years in the future, I think it genuinely could be an advantage for the populist right. But that's conjecture. That's a guess. That's a prediction, which could not turn out to be true for any number of reasons. But I don't think really, even in a best case scenario, votes at 16 will be an advantage for the left. Because I think what you will get is a lot of people voting for left-wing independents, Corbyn's party, the Greens. They won't line up behind Labour. I don't think the idea that Labour will get any tactical advantage out of votes at 16, I don't really see. So anyway, I wanted to get rid of that off the bat, because that's not a moral argument, or an argument about why I think votes at 16 is bad for British democracy, which I think it is. But I wanted to get that out of the way. Okay, so I think one of the things that I think is bad about votes at 16 is I think it will somewhat infantilize British politics to a greater degree. So I think that, at least at first, there will be this idea that 16 and 17-year-olds will be this great group of people to go after. And they will sort of think that actually if you can pitch this in a certain way to 16 and 17-year-olds, then maybe you can make a breakthrough. And there will be all these people that you can get to suddenly that you couldn't get to before. And I think a lot of it's going to be pretty terrible and pretty cringe and pretty awful. And the stuff that breaks through is probably not going to be the stuff that, if you are a real Democrat, whether you're on the left or the right, that you are going to want to have broken through. You're going to have a lot of stuff that's going to be very TikTok-y, because that's where they're going to go for it, isn't it? You're going to try and get to 16 and 17-year-olds. You're going to try and get to 16 and 17-year-olds in 2029. I mean, if it's not TikTok, it'll be whatever's replaced TikTok by that point. Which my general sense is probably not going to be like more... it's not going to be made for greater attention spans than TikTok is. Let's be frank about that. And I think what you're going to get is a lot of stuff that is just geared to short-termism, trying to get you to come out to the ballot box. And you could say that could happen anyway. I just think it's something about the gimmick of lowering the voting age that will probably have a negative effect on this. I think that's short-term, but I think it's a negative effect. I think another thing that will happen is, and this is a touchy subject, and some of you will get upset about this, and you're going to get annoyed. And particularly if you're on the left, you're going to get pissy with me about even bringing this up. But without going into real detail, there are certain cultures where there's enough of a significant minority in Britain. They're of a certain size whereby actually being able to corral the votes of their 16 and 17-year-olds, particularly their 16 and 17-year-old daughters, let's face it, is going to be advantageous to pushing a certain agenda or a certain set of issues and a certain set of candidates. I know you can read between the lines when I say that, but I think a lot of you will know what I mean. And I think that's bad. Sorry. I just think that's rubbish. I think we already have enough of that in British politics. We already have enough of a problem with that in British politics. The idea that we are creating a whole couple of years for people to essentially abuse that privilege within British politics. The British political system is bad. I think it will be bad. So that is one really solidly bad thing, I think, that votes at 16 gives us. I think the biggest thing, though, the biggest reason I don't like votes at 16 is I think it's part of something that's going on the left that the left don't really understand. It will lead to a backlash. Okay? So if you look at a lot of the arguments online around why votes at 16 is a good idea, a lot of that opens up a real can of worms, which is really a bit scary and could lead to some really terrible stuff in actually the very near future. So an example would be, well, a lot of 16 and 17-year-olds pay tax, so we should why should a 16-year-old who's paying income tax in some way, having a part-time job and they're paying some sort of income tax, why should they be denied the right to vote? And what that's bringing it back to is it's centering the idea of the franchise on paying tax, which is a strange thing for the left to really be arguing for if you really think about it at this point, because we have a lot of people who are on benefits across the country. Whether you think that's good or bad, or that's fine, or we shouldn't do anything about it, I'm not going to address that in this video. What I'm saying is it's a weird thing for the left, which obviously doesn't want to cut back on the benefit system and wants to keep people who are currently on benefits, to say that, well, what we should do is remove... They're unconsciously making an argument by tying the vote to paying tax that, well, people who don't pay tax shouldn't get the franchise. I mean, I know that's not what they're saying and that's not what they're arguing, but what they don't realize is that's where their argument leads, right? If you're saying 16-year-olds who are working and paying tax should get the franchise by dint of the fact that they're paying tax. You're tying the idea of taxation to being able to vote, and what you end up with is an argument that you're presenting to the right, which says, well, people who are on benefits shouldn't get the right to vote. Like, if they're not working, right? If you are on out of work, but you're not employed, you're not paying tax, you shouldn't get the right to vote. Now, I don't agree with that. I think that's bad. I don't want to take away the franchise from people who are unemployed. What I'm saying is that's where those arguments lead. Do you see what I'm saying? And I'm already seeing it, even whenever this came to light a few days ago. I'm already seeing those arguments, and I'm already seeing that play out. And so it doesn't take a genius to figure out, a political genius to figure out that actually in these arguments keep going the way that they're going now, that is where they will end up, which is, hey, maybe people who don't work shouldn't get the right to vote. And actually, and then you have a huge backlash. That's the other thing, right? So people get annoyed with the idea that 16-year-olds have got the right to vote. And then a right-wing government comes in and goes, well, sod this. Actually, you know what? We're going to make it so you can't vote until you're 21. How's that? Like, as a sort of tit for tat. Because this is how human society works, sadly enough. Right? This is why compromise is so important. Because essentially when you get into this thing that we have now, where the left go off in this wild direction, the right go off in this wild direction, what ends up happening is whoever has the power at any given time will then institute something that the other side will just feel morally bound not just to eliminate, but to counteract, to go the other way and counteract in a quite severe way. So we end up with votes to 21, and people start to go, actually, this is good. We quite like this. Actually, this is great. And we never really had 18, 19, 20-year-olds vote anyway. Actually, you know what? Why don't we go back to 25? Yeah. You know, the frontal cortex isn't really fully developed until you're 25. So it makes perfect sense. Let's make it 25. And then we get into the idea of, well, you know, we're tying it to employment. Why don't we tie it to landowning? So maybe you have to be a landowner. And suddenly, like, we end up in a place where we're back in, like, pre-1867. That's one of the Parliament Acts, by the way, in case you're wondering about British history. And I'm not going to go into everything about the 1867 Act, but basically giving more and more people... We went in stages, as most societies did, about giving more and more people the vote. And I would not want to see that go backwards, particularly. I don't want to see it go backwards. That's why I think that you get to a point where everybody can agree, okay, fine, look, everybody over 18 who's a citizen can vote. Great. We've all agreed on that. As soon as you open that up to something, right, where you're saying, well, we're going to open this up and we're going to say, actually, 16-year-olds can vote. You open up a can of worms. You open up the discussion again, right? This thing that we settled on as a society then gets opened up for discussion. Once it's opened up for discussion, then people can say 21, 25, 30, 40, like whatever, right? And we end up in what I think, as a liberal, is a bad situation. And I think that's what you're going to get with votes to 16. It's going to create a backlash, and Nigel Farage or whoever's around in 2029 will be able to say, votes to 21. You know what? That's going to be a vote winner. It really will, in a way that it wouldn't have been if we hadn't opened up the votes to 16 can of worms. Because you have a whole bunch of older voters who will say, that sounds great. 21's so young anyway. I mean, if you're 70, 21's insanely young. So, you know, it seems like 21. I mean, that certainly seems young. Yeah, that's fine. Let's keep it there. And again, we just have this trend. This is the thing I'm actually genuinely constantly worried about, is that we're going to have a repeal of the liberal advances of the last 30, 40, 50 years. Reason being is lots of people, there's a whole chunk of people, a sort of paleo-conservative group of people who really want to repeal this stuff. Like, they really want to get to a point where in extremists, like homosexuality is illegal again. Forget about gay marriage. Like, forget about that. We're talking about, like, homosexuality is illegal again. Maybe you can outlaw divorce if you get far enough. There are people who genuinely want that to happen, right? And the thing is, they are being constantly given ammunition because we have a left that's going increasingly far and weird and strange on loads of stuff. And I mean, I just want to, if you're watching this, okay, and you're a liberal person or you're on the left, and you're saying, oh, but I like vote 16, and I think vote 16, and blah, blah, blah. I think vote 16 is a good idea. Okay, what I want you to understand is, do you think vote at 16, right? Lowering the voting age from 18 to 16, so 16 and 17-year-olds can vote. Do you think that's so important that you're going to put in the balance the whole conversation about who gets to vote and why? Because it just seems like something that maybe the left and the liberals shouldn't put on the table, because it's only actually going to, like, be less liberal if we're putting this up for discussion. What's going to happen with the discussion over 10 years, I genuinely think it will be less liberal, it will be less left friendly, and that's where we'll end up. And actually, in an aging society, I think maybe you want to think about that. And maybe you think that actually a way to counteract that is to have votes of 16, right? Like the 16 and 17-year-olds that will exist over the next 10 years. Well, it'd be great if we had them vote, because they'll probably be more progressive, or at least they'll be more forward-thinking, even if they're right-wing or whatever. I just think what you're asking for is votes at 25. That's what I genuinely think. And I think this is such a hard thing to talk about in terms of getting this across to people who are on the left or who are liberal, because they don't see it. They are fighting a war, like, where they think the front is over here, right? And it's over here. That's the thing. They don't get it. They didn't really absorb the Trump second presidency win. They didn't get what that meant. They haven't absorbed what reform being in the 30s while everybody else is in, like, the teens in the polls, and reform getting 700 seats almost in the local elections, and winning the Runcorn by-election, and winning 2 mayoral contests that really, by any stretch of the imagination, they had no business winning. What I mean by that is they didn't, given where they were coming into, where they were a year before, the idea that they could have won 2 of those elections was insane, given the organizational strength / weakness that they had. And they won them. And they won them because this is what's happening. This is what's coming. This is the wave, right? And it frustrates me, really, that leftists and liberals are still thinking that the battle is not where it is. And that's what I really don't like about the votes to 16 thing. It's an idea for a world that isn't there, that doesn't exist, that is in the imagination of someone who is a very comfortable upper middle class person who lives in Islington and doesn't really see any problems with the way most of the country's going, really, and thinks actually most of the country's problems could just be solved if we taxed billionaires a one-off 10% or whatever stupid idea like that is going around on the left at the moment. And it's just not true. It's just not where it is, and it's just not what's going to happen. So it seems really destructive. It seems like something that a kind of technocratic, centrist, center-left, dying kind of establishment would do as some sort of attempted bulwark against their destruction, when in actual fact it's just going to be one more thing that's held against them and shown to be proof of their out-of-touchness and their ultimate stupidity. Anyway, I could go on about this. I always like to keep these to about 20 minutes, so I'm going to keep it here. I don't think it's a good idea for lots of reasons, and I think it's a fundamentally bad idea. And just because right-wing people that you don't like think it's a bad idea doesn't mean, and actually their points could be bad. Their reasons for not liking votes to 16 could be bad, and you could disagree with their points of view on why they think votes to 16 are bad. That still doesn't make it a good idea. That's my point. Anyway, I'm Nick Tyrone, neoliberal centrist dad. Thank you for listening to me about votes to 16. Cheers to you all. Have a good Saturday evening. Love you all. Love's pretty strong, isn't it? I don't know most of you. Maybe I wouldn't love you. I don't know. Maybe I wouldn't like some of you. Maybe you wouldn't like me if we actually met and we actually chatted. That's very possible. Maybe some of you don't like me even though you're watching this to the end. That's a weird thing about the age we live in. There are people who respond to every single social media thing I ever do who hate me. It's weird, isn't it? It's very, very strange. Anyhow, I've gone on a tangent again. Thank you for listening. If you've listened this far, please like and subscribe and leave me a comment. You can leave me a bad comment. I don't mind. Comment is a comment. I get bad comments all the time. I get terrible comments. If you want to see the terrible comments I get, look at Twitter. Although I know it's not called Twitter anymore, but you know what I mean. Anyway, have a good evening. Bye, guys.